There's a kind of serene beauty you see in suburban America, tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, neighbors smiling from their driveways. When I first moved to Aspen Pine Meadows, I was convinced it was the perfect place to settle down with my wife, Linda, and our 6-year-old son, Lucas. The houses here looked like they'd popped right out of a catalog, each facade meticulously maintained under the watchful eye of the Homeowners Association, or HOA. From day one, I heard rumors about an iron-fisted board member who, by all accounts, made life miserable for anyone who dared to deviate from the prescribed norms. Her real name was Denise Arnell, but behind closed doors, residents called her Karen, referencing the pop culture nickname for an entitled, demanding, and overbearing woman who thrives on conflict. I laughed off the stories at first. After all, how bad could one person be? I soon discovered it wasn't just rumor or exaggeration. The moment I stepped out of my moving truck, sweaty and covered in dust, a well-groomed woman in her 50s strode toward me with a clipboard pressed against her chest. This had to be Denise, Karen, making her rounds. She introduced herself formally as the head of enforcement and compliance at the HOA. She politely handed me a pamphlet that laid out the association's rules. No overnight street parking, no unapproved fence colors, no basketball hoops visible from the street, no lawn ornaments over 3 feet tall. The list went on. Despite her smile, there was something unsettling about the way she took stock of my every move. Her gaze flickered to the height of the shrubs in my front yard, to the paint chips on the old shutters, and even to the untrimmed edges of my lawn. I tried to shrug it off as standard HOA zeal. Maybe she was just enthusiastic about her job. Little did I know that this was merely the surface of her overreaching tendencies. I'm a firefighter by profession, stationed in a city about 30 minutes away. My work sometimes involves riding with the Emergency Medical Services (EMS) team. We have a combined station arrangement in our district. As a result, I've grown used to seeing paramedics and EMTs in action, dedicated, compassionate professionals who respond to calls at all hours, in all conditions. A few days after we moved in, I was on a morning jog through the neighborhood when I heard the distant wail of an ambulance. The sound grew louder, echoing across the carefully laid-out cul-de-sacs. Residents peeked out of their curtains or stepped onto their porches, alerted by the unusual racket. Emergency vehicles rarely showed up in Aspen Pine Meadows. At least that's what I'd been told. I paused at a corner, curious. The ambulance turned onto my street, lights flashing, siren blaring, heading toward a house about 5 lots down from mine. A man sprinted out from the home, frantic. The paramedics hopped out of the ambulance, quickly unloaded their gear, and rushed inside. As a trained firefighter, my instinct was to move closer, to see if I could assist in any way. But by the time I jogged over, they were already administering care. Soon, they loaded a young woman onto a stretcher, apparently suffering from severe respiratory distress. They whisked her into the ambulance, and within moments, they were gone, sirens fading in the distance. I remember feeling a pang of gratitude for the first responders who worked so hard to preserve life. A few neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, wearing anxious expressions. I overheard quiet remarks about how everything in Aspen Pine Meadows had always been so safe and so perfect, as though emergencies happened only elsewhere. But what struck me more was the presence of Karen, standing on a porch across the street, arms folded tightly, lips pursed. Rather than concern, she wore the expression of someone who'd just witnessed a great inconvenience. That was my first sign that Karen didn't necessarily see paramedics or emergency workers as heroic figures. Rather, she viewed any unplanned intrusion, no matter how necessary, as a breach of her carefully controlled domain. In the days that followed, rumors swirled that Karen had called the HOA board members to complain about how the ambulance had disturbed the peace, how the siren was too loud, how the paramedics had trespassed on private property. At the time, it seemed too absurd to be true. Yet, as I would learn, reality with Karen often defied common sense. Aspen Pine Meadows was the kind of place where neighbors occasionally threw block parties, where kids rode bikes in cul-de-sacs, and where holiday decorations lined every street in December. Underneath this cheerful exterior, however, a culture of quiet fear was growing. Karen had systematically ingrained in everyone the dread of being reported or fined. I heard about families cited for having a swing set in the backyard that was a foot too tall, or for letting their trash cans linger at the curb an extra hour past pickup time. One family was threatened with legal action because their teenage son practiced the trumpet in the evenings, creating a noise disturbance. The stories went on. But while people grumbled privately, nobody openly challenged Karen. She seemed well connected to local authorities, or at least adept at weaponizing bureaucratic processes to her advantage. If a neighbor tried to push back, they'd be slapped with repeated fines or threatened with property liens. Karen moved with a smug assurance that, in the end, she would always come out on top. A few neighbors actually supported her. They claimed she was the only reason the neighborhood looked so immaculate and that her efforts protected property values. But even among her supporters, there was a noticeable reluctance to cross her. She was too unpredictable, too willing to escalate trivial issues. For a while, I managed to avoid her wrath. My own schedule as a firefighter was hectic, so any potential infractions went unnoticed, especially because Linda, my wife, was meticulous about following rules. We'd quietly park only in the garage. We kept the lawn trimmed to the exact height. We avoided placing any decorations or planters in front without formal HOA approval. It felt stifling, but we valued peace. Still, a sense of foreboding lingered. You can't live in constant fear without something eventually snapping, and I suspected that Karen would eventually overstep. I just didn't expect it to be so devastating when she did. The tipping point began, innocently enough, when a middle-aged couple moved into the house directly across from Karen's. The husband was a retired paramedic named Jerry Thompson, and his wife, Mary Ann, was a hospice nurse. They'd chosen Aspen Pine Meadows for its tranquility, an escape from the emotional toll of their professional lives. Jerry was a friendly man who occasionally struck up conversation with me about first responder work. He mentioned that retirement had been hard to adjust to. He missed the camaraderie of the EMS station. However, he was grateful for the chance to focus on his health and well-being after years of back-breaking ambulance shifts. Mary Ann, too, was looking forward to a quiet life, especially after dealing daily with severely ill patients. Their presence did not go unnoticed by Karen. When she learned Jerry was a retired paramedic, she reportedly scoffed. She didn't trust outsiders who think they know everything. The remark struck me as bizarre. Who mistrusts a retired paramedic? Within a few weeks, Karen began finding excuses to confront Jerry and Mary Ann. She left notes complaining about the angle of their mailbox, the color of their garden hoses, the times they washed their cars. And she complained, ironically, that Jerry kept odd hours, as if a retired medical worker had to adhere to a certain schedule. He actually just woke up early to jog, but that was enough to spark her suspicion. Jerry tried to remain patient. He even attended an HOA meeting to address any concerns, offering a friendly handshake to Karen. In response, she delivered a curt nod and promptly turned away, as though any polite gesture from him was a challenge to her power. That was the start of a simmering tension that would soon boil over. One stifling summer evening, around 11 p.m., I was just settling in after a long shift at the fire station. Linda and Lucas were already asleep upstairs. I stood by the window in our living room, savoring the rare moment of calm, when I saw flashing red lights streak across the walls. An ambulance roared into the neighborhood. My pulse quickened. It parked in front of Karen's house, of all places. The street lamps illuminated two paramedics leaping out and rushing toward her front porch. In a moment of shock, I realized someone in Karen's home must have called 911, or perhaps a neighbor did. Confusion replaced my earlier tension. Why was the ambulance at Karen's address? Moments later, I saw Jerry from across the street coming over in his slippers. His medical training must have spurred him into action. He approached the ambulance, presumably offering to help the paramedics. One of them recognized him, a friend from his old EMS unit. They seemed to chat briefly, Jerry nodding with the calm authority of someone who'd done this job 1,000 times. They hurried inside Karen's house. The lights of the ambulance continued to pulse in the hot summer darkness. From my window, I couldn't see much beyond that glare. I glanced at the clock, 11:20 p.m. The night felt endless as I waited, wondering what was happening inside. About 10 minutes later, Jerry emerged onto the porch, followed by two paramedics who were holding a loaded stretcher. On it lay Karen's elderly father, from what I could tell, a frail man with an oxygen mask strapped to his face. His eyes were half closed. The paramedics navigated the stretcher down the steps, headed for the ambulance, but they paused suddenly, because Karen was blocking their path. I couldn't make out every word she yelled, but her stance was unmistakable, arms flailing, her face reddening in the flashing lights. Even from my vantage point, the tension was palpable. She seemed to be berating Jerry. The paramedics hesitated, as though they weren't sure if they should push past her. Alarmed, I stepped outside onto my own porch to see if I could hear better. A few other neighbors had done the same. All of us stood there, uncertain if we should intervene. "You have no right." Karen's voice was shrill, carrying across the lawn. "How dare you barge in without my permission?" Jerry's calm tone responded. "Karen, I only stepped in at the paramedics' request. Your father needed immediate attention. His vitals were crashing. They needed an extra pair of hands." "I don't need your help," she snapped. "You're just some washed-up paramedic living off your pension, nosing around where you don't belong. This is a private residence, and you have no authority here." One of the paramedics tried to reason with her. "Ma'am, your father needs to be transported to the hospital. We must hurry." Karen whirled on him, fury contorting her features. "Then go. But don't think you can trespass on my property whenever you please." She pointed accusingly at Jerry. "And you, stay away from my family." Stunned, Jerry and the paramedics managed to maneuver around her and load Karen's father into the ambulance. In a swirl of red lights and engine noise, the vehicle sped away. Karen stood on her porch, glaring at Jerry with an expression I can only describe as venomous. Then she marched inside, slamming the door. I exchanged worried glances with a few neighbors who had gathered. After a few awkward moments, we dispersed, none of us entirely sure what we'd just witnessed. Karen's anger was beyond normal, like she would rather let her father's health spiral than accept help from someone she disliked. It was a sobering glimpse into how deep her hostility ran. In the following days, Karen's father stabilized at the hospital. Although Jerry never mentioned it openly, I learned through our neighbor, Jill, that he'd spoken to the paramedics that night. They said Karen's father had pneumonia and might not have survived without immediate intervention. You'd think Karen would have been grateful, but her pride overshadowed everything else. She began a campaign of petty retribution against Jerry. He found offensive notes in his mailbox. "Stay out of other people's business." Anonymous letters arrived containing veiled threats. "We don't want your meddling kind here." Of course, everyone strongly suspected Karen was behind them, but she was always too cunning to leave direct evidence. To make matters worse, rumors circulated that Karen was stirring up the HOA board to pass new safety rules regarding medical personnel who didn't have explicit permission to enter homes in the neighborhood. It sounded absurd, but in Aspen Pine Meadows, such nonsense was entirely possible under Karen's watch. She would manipulate any bylaw to serve her agenda. At an HOA meeting soon after, Karen laid out her twisted logic. "We must establish protocols to prevent unscrupulous individuals from exploiting medical situations to trespass. We can't have random, retired paramedics interfering with legitimate responders." She never mentioned Jerry by name, but everyone knew who she meant. It was petty, dangerous, and humiliating for him. Despite mounting frustration, Jerry remained polite. "I was just trying to help," he said, voice steady during the meeting. "In an emergency, every second counts. I'd do the same for any neighbor." Karen sneered. "We have official paramedics for that, not vigilantes in medical scrubs." The phrase medical vigilante hung in the air like toxic gas. Several neighbors shook their heads in disapproval, but Karen pressed on, ignoring them. The motion to restrict outside medical assistance was tabled at that meeting, likely because even Karen's supporters found it too outrageous. Still, the seeds were planted, and I had a sinking feeling that something worse was on the horizon. One quiet afternoon, as I was returning from the fire station, Linda ran up to me, looking shaken. "Did you hear?" she said. "Jerry Thompson had a heart attack this morning. They rushed him to the hospital." My stomach lurched. Jerry was only in his late 50s, but his paramedic career had taken a toll. Years of stressful calls, sleepless nights, lifting heavy patients, all of it can wear a body down. We later learned that his heart attack wasn't massive, but it was serious enough to land him in the ICU. Mary Ann was at his side, terrified. Their children flew in from out of state to be with them. Suddenly, the once peaceful retirement they dreamed of turned into a battle for Jerry's life. Many neighbors rallied around them. People brought meals, took care of their yard work, offered rides. Even though Aspen Pine Meadows had a controlling HOA, a lot of the residents were genuinely kind. In times of crisis, folks typically came together. It was a testament to the good hearts overshadowed by Karen's tyranny. Karen, however, did nothing, not even a gesture of sympathy. She passed by Mary Ann's house a few times, strolling with the haughty air of someone checking for violations, never stopping to ask how Jerry was doing. Then again, given her past hostility, nobody expected compassion from her. For a while, the neighborhood's attention shifted away from Karen's antics to focus on Jerry's recovery. In a strange way, it was almost peaceful, as if her usual harassment was paused. But that lull wouldn't last. Karen was biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to reassert her control. Several weeks later, life in Aspen Pine Meadows returned to its routine. Jerry was discharged, prescribed rest and cardiac therapy. On a Saturday, I spotted him walking carefully around the block, doctor's orders to engage in gentle exercise. Mary Ann hovered protectively, ensuring he didn't overexert himself. During that same period, the county EMS hired a new paramedic, Trevor Diaz, a young man eager to prove himself. He'd grown up in a nearby city, served in the military as a combat medic, and then returned home to pursue a career in emergency medicine. I met him at the fire station, where he trained alongside my crew for a few shifts to learn local protocols. I liked Trevor right away, straightforward, competent, with a deep sense of responsibility. He reminded me of Jerry in his younger years, the type who'd leap to help a stranger without hesitation. Trevor expressed particular frustration with bureaucratic red tape that sometimes delayed medical aid. When seconds count, the last thing you want is someone shouting about technicalities, he said at the station one day. My job is to save lives, not parse real estate regulations or property lines. I gave him a wry smile. Careful in Aspen Pine Meadows if you ever get a call out there. We have a local HOA bigwig who thinks paramedics need permission slips. He raised an eyebrow. You're kidding. Wish I were, I said. If you run into a woman named Denise Arnell, everyone calls her Karen. Be prepared for a fight over anything that doesn't fit her perfect suburban bubble. He shook his head in disbelief. That's insane. I'd like to see her try to stop me from doing my job. His words carried a note of defiance, but there was also innocence in his assumption that reason would prevail. I would later replay that conversation in my mind, wishing I had warned him more forcefully. But who could predict how far Karen's obsession with control would go? One sweltering afternoon in late July, while I was off duty at home, an ambulance tore through the neighborhood again. Its wailing siren echoed painfully off the neat rows of houses, scattering any sense of suburban calm. My heart thudded. Another emergency in Aspen Pine Meadows? From my window, I saw Trevor jump out. He was the primary paramedic that day, accompanied by his partner, a seasoned MT named Lisa Carter. They grabbed their gear and ran toward a small, single-story home near the back of the subdivision. The place belonged to an elderly resident named Martin Garcia, known to have chronic health issues. Neighbors trickled onto their porches, eyes wide. Some recognized Martin's house. He lived alone since his wife passed, and Karen had famously clashed with him multiple times over minor infractions, like allowing his rose bushes to grow an inch too high. I gulped, praying Karen wouldn't involve herself here. The last thing Martin needed was meddling during a medical emergency. Trevor and Lisa disappeared inside Martin's house. The ambulance lights strobed silently, sirens switched off now that they'd arrived. We waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The hot afternoon dragged on. Suddenly, the sound of an approaching police cruiser broke the silence. 2 officers hopped out, scanning the area. Confusion rippled among the neighbors. Why had the police arrived? Then the unthinkable. I saw Karen step out from her SUV, waving the officers over. She was clearly the one who had called them. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Was she seriously interfering with a paramedic call? Could she be complaining about trespassing on Martin's property? A few neighbors and I began drifting closer, still keeping a distance, to see what was happening. Karen led the 2 officers toward Martin's house with an air of self-importance. She pointed at the ambulance parked in the driveway. This is private property, I heard her say loudly. I'm the HOA officer in charge here, and I demand they leave if they don't have proper authorization. One of the officers looked uncertain. Ma'am, the ambulance is responding to a 911 call. Karen barked back. I didn't call 911. And Martin has repeatedly violated HOA rules. He might have some family arrangement, but no one gave these paramedics blanket permission to stomp around this neighborhood. We have protocols for visitors, especially when the homeowner is incapacitated or possibly incompetent. My jaw nearly dropped. She was conflating medical emergency response with some twisted interpretation of HOA rules. The officer hesitated again. Are you sure the homeowner didn't call 911 himself? Or a neighbor? Karen folded her arms. Even if they did, that doesn't allow them to barge in here. This is an ongoing legal matter. Martin's property is under review due to his non-compliance with the association. I believe he's behind on certain HOA fees, so we have partial liens. These so-called paramedics may be trespassing. I wanted to scream. Martin's medical situation was urgent enough that an ambulance was dispatched with lights and sirens. This was no petty neighborly dispute. Yet Karen's words held a bizarre power. The officers, apparently unfamiliar with the details, looked uncertain about how to proceed. If Martin indeed had outstanding legal issues with the HOA, could it complicate the paramedics' presence? While they argued, Trevor appeared in the doorway, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his brow. He called out to the officers, "We need to get Mr. Garcia to the hospital immediately. He's in severe respiratory distress. He might be having a heart attack or a pulmonary embolism. We can't waste time." He tried to return inside to get Martin onto a stretcher, but Karen stepped in front of him. "You hold on. You're entering private property without verifying your right to be here." Trevor's expression shifted from urgency to disbelief. "Ma'am, we're paramedics on a 911 call. That's all the right to be here we need. Now, please move out of the way." Karen refused. "Not until you prove you have permission from the homeowner or the HOA. If Mr. Garcia is incompetent, the HOA can't just let strangers roam in and out. We have rules, and those rules exist to protect the community." Fuming, Trevor glanced at the officers. "Are you going to help or not? A man's life is in danger." Before the officers could respond, Karen jabbed a finger in Trevor's face. "Don't raise your voice at me, young man. I've dealt with your type before. Think you can do whatever you want just because you've got a uniform? Well, guess what? This is my jurisdiction too." My heart pounded. This situation was spiraling, and valuable time was ticking away for Martin inside the house. Trevor, with a paramedic sense of responsibility, tried to move past Karen again. He had no intention of physically harming her. He simply needed to return to his patient. But Karen raged. "Officers, do something. He's trespassing." The younger of the two officers, evidently unsure of the correct course, placed a hand on Trevor's shoulder. "Sir, step back for a moment. We need to verify some details." Trevor's eyes flicked with desperation. "I don't have time for details. The patient is critical." The older officer stepped in, speaking more sternly. "Calm down, paramedic. We have to handle this properly." Exasperated, Trevor tried to pull away. "I am calm, but we have an emergency." Karen seized the moment. In a tone dripping with feigned alarm, she shrieked, "He's resisting the officers. He's getting violent." Trevor wasn't violent at all. He was just determined to save Martin's life. But the officers, hearing Karen's cry and seeing Trevor's urgent movements, apparently misread the situation. The younger officer reached for his taser, warning, "Stop resisting." Trevor tried one last plea. "This is a medical emergency." But the officer discharged the taser. The crackling burst of electricity shot through Trevor's body, causing him to collapse onto the lawn. He let out a cry of pain, then fell silent, body twitching uncontrollably. A horrified gasp rose among the onlooking neighbors. Lisa Carter, Trevor's EMT partner, rushed out from inside the house at that exact moment, eyes wide with shock. "What did you do?" she screamed at the cops, kneeling beside Trevor as he convulsed. "He's a paramedic. He's not resisting. He's trying to save a patient." The older officer barked at her to stand back, but Lisa glared at him, tears in her eyes. "We have a patient inside who's dying." Karen took a step back, eyes gleaming with a strange mixture of triumph and uncertainty. She'd gotten the police to neutralize Trevor, but now the horrifying reality set in. No one was attending to Martin. The seconds were ticking away. While Trevor lay on the lawn, half conscious from the taser shock, Lisa frantically radioed for another ambulance. She was torn between helping Trevor and returning to Martin. Meanwhile, the officers, confused and increasingly panicked, yelled conflicting orders. One tried to cuff Trevor, but realized he was incapacitated. The other turned to Lisa, demanding she stay put. The entire scene descended into chaos. Nearby residents shouted, some filming on their phones, others weeping openly. "He's a paramedic. Let him go help." The desperation in their voices underscored the unfolding tragedy. Inside Martin's house, no one was left to continue life-saving measures. Lisa had been forced out by the commotion, and Trevor had been tasered before he could properly stabilize Martin for transport. When additional paramedics finally arrived, this time with a police escort that parted them from Karen, they rushed in, only to find Martin unresponsive. Their attempts to resuscitate him were too late. The official report would later list his time of death as 3:46 p.m. Trevor, still dazed, cursed himself for not being able to return sooner. Tears streaked Lisa's face as she stood in the front yard, blood pounding in her ears, listening to the radio call. Code Black, patient is deceased. Anguish rippled across the neighbors' faces. Some pointed at Karen in silent accusation. Others shouted at the police. Someone exclaimed, "That man died because of you." Another cried, "They tasered a medic while a man was dying inside." Karen stood stiff, apparently too stunned to retort, though her expression revealed a flicker of stubborn arrogance, like she still believed she was in the right. Within minutes of Martin's death, more law enforcement arrived on scene, including the local precinct captain. Yellow police tape cordoned off the area. The ambulance that had arrived as backup now stood idle, lights off, a grim symbol of defeat. Trevor was eventually helped to his feet, still wincing from the lingering effects of the taser. The officer who had tossed him appeared rattled, as though realizing the gravity of the mistake. Lisa insisted on checking Trevor's vitals, but he waved her off, eyes hollow with remorse. "I'm okay." "He's not," he said, looking toward Martin's house. "He's gone, and it's my fault." "It's not your fault," Lisa whispered, tears on her cheeks. "We tried." But Trevor shook his head. "We didn't try hard enough. We let them stop us." Paramedics from the new ambulance took over the scene, verifying Martin's death. Soon, the coroner arrived. Meanwhile, neighbors demanded answers from the police. Some cornered Karen, spewing accusations. Others recorded everything with their phones, determined to preserve evidence of this brutal fiasco. Karen grew defensive, her voice cracking. I was only trying to enforce HOA regulations and protect property rights. I didn't cause this." The paramedic escalated the situation. Shouts erupted in response. "Stop lying, Karen. This is on you." The neighborhood's simmering resentment had finally boiled over into outright hostility. The hours and days that followed were a blur of anger, grief, and shock. The local news stations picked up the story, plastering headlines like, "Paramedic tasered on scene, patient dies. Neighborhood HOA under fire." Footage of the incident, captured by various cell phones, circulated online. The image of Trevor being tasered while trying to respond to an emergency ignited widespread outrage. Martin Garcia's family, upon learning the circumstances of his death, was livid. They enlisted a high-profile attorney and prepared to sue the city for negligence and excessive force. They also targeted the HOA for obstructing emergency services. Karen, specifically, was named in potential civil suits, accused of instigating the police action with false claims of trespassing and vigilante paramedics. City officials scrambled to manage the fallout. The police chief held a press conference, apologizing for the tragic outcome and promising a full investigation. But public sentiment was already sour. Protesters gathered outside the police station, demanding that the officer who tasered Trevor be suspended or fired. Others directed their fury at Karen, calling for her arrest. Trevor found himself in the center of a media storm, yet he was too distraught to appear on camera. As far as he was concerned, he'd failed to save a patient, and that was a paramedic's greatest nightmare. Lisa tried to comfort him, reminding him that their job had become impossible the moment the taser was fired. Meanwhile, Karen dug in her heels. She refused to resign from the HOA board, insisting she had merely asked for police assistance to handle a trespassing matter. Her home became a flashpoint. Angry neighbors scrawled "murderer" on the sidewalk in chalk, or taped signs to her fence reading "shame." The tension grew daily, culminating in restless nights where she peered out from behind her curtains, fearful and defiant. The city launched an internal affairs investigation into the two officers who responded that day. Their body camera footage, combined with witness cell phone videos, painted a stark picture. Karen confronted Trevor at the door, blocking his way. Trevor pleaded for urgency. Karen escalated the situation by accusing Trevor of trespassing and forcibly entering private property. The younger officer used the taser without first attempting to defuse the situation properly. The older officer's report was riddled with contradictions, highlighting confusion about whether Martin Garcia had authorized paramedics to enter. Later, it emerged Martin himself had dialed 911, but the phone call cut off after he gasped for breath. Dispatch records confirmed that standard procedure would allow paramedics to enter any home where a 911 call originated, especially if the occupant was unresponsive. All of this forced the police department to place both officers on administrative leave. The district attorney hinted at possible criminal charges, ranging from manslaughter to official misconduct, if it was found that their actions directly contributed to Martin's death. Parallel to the police investigation, the HOA board convened in an emergency session, scrambling to distance itself from Karen. Board members faced intense pressure from residents who threatened to dissolve the association altogether. Several sponsors of community projects demanded accountability. Some members quietly admitted they'd been bullied by Karen for years, coerced into supporting her extreme measures. Now, with the entire country's gaze on them, they wanted to save their own reputations. Karen, for her part, seethed with resentment. She blamed the paramedics, the police, even Martin Garcia himself, for not following proper procedures. She made bizarre, defiant statements about how property rights are fundamental, refusing to acknowledge that a man's life had been at stake. Her arrogance only deepened public outrage. Jerry Thompson, the retired paramedic who had previously clashed with Karen, emerged from his period of recovery with a renewed sense of purpose. Though still frail from his heart attack, he insisted on speaking to reporters. "This tragedy should never have happened," Jerry said at a neighborhood press gathering. "I've served as a paramedic for over 20 years. In an emergency, you do whatever it takes to save a life. That's not trespassing, it's compassion." He recounted how Karen had impeded his own attempts to help her father. Then, with a trembling voice, he described the taser incident. "I know what it's like to be on an urgent call. The adrenaline, the responsibility. Trevor Diaz was trying to do his job. He didn't deserve to be taken down like a criminal." Jerry's emotional plea struck a chord with many. The local news aired his statement repeatedly, framing it as a direct condemnation of Karen's draconian approach. A wave of sympathy for first responders flooded social media. Citizens began donating to funds that supported paramedics facing legal battles, and the phrase, "saving lives isn't trespassing," became a rallying cry. Meanwhile, the Garcia family lawyers seized on Jerry's account. This not only highlights Karen's pattern of harassment, but also underscores a culture in the HOA that prioritizes control over human decency, the lawyer declared. "We are adding charges of wrongful death," citing the HOA's interference in emergency medical services. As the lawsuit against the city took shape, Martin Garcia's family also prepared a separate civil suit directly against Karen and the HOA. They alleged that Karen's actions and the HOA's lack of oversight caused irreparable harm and contributed to Martin's preventable death. Over the following weeks, depositions were taken. Trevor Diaz gave a heart-wrenching testimony about how he was mid-assessment when he stepped outside to retrieve a piece of equipment, only to be blocked by Karen. He never made it back to Martin in time. Lisa Carter corroborated every detail, explaining how valuable minutes were lost because of the altercation. Multiple neighbors testified to Karen's hostility, describing how she explicitly ordered the police to remove Trevor from the property. The phone videos provided chilling evidence of her arrogance and the officer's misguided response. For Karen, the legal consequences mounted. She was subpoenaed, forced to explain her rationale under oath. Her combative posture in court only fueled the plaintiff's case. She insisted she had the right to halt paramedics, citing property disputes with Martin Garcia. Her lawyer attempted to argue that she merely asked the officers to verify the paramedics' credentials, but the footage clearly showed her demanding they remove Trevor altogether. In parallel, the police department faced its own reckoning. Public anger soared. painting the department as incompetent or complicit. The younger officer who fired the taser was suspended without pay, pending the outcome of the investigation. Rumors swirled that he might face charges of criminally negligent homicide, although the district attorney remained tight-lipped. All these events escalated into a broader conversation about the sanctity of emergency medical care. Political leaders jumped in, condemning the incident as a catastrophic failure of priorities. No property dispute should ever override someone's right to life-saving treatment, the mayor stated. This is about basic human decency. Within Aspen Pine Meadows, Karen's reign of terror crumbled. The once intimidated residents realized they had more power than they thought. They organized a special HOA meeting, one that Karen was barred from attending, to discuss dissolving the association or at least reforming it drastically. In the largest turnout the neighborhood had ever seen, dozens of residents packed into a community hall. People spoke passionately about the fear Karen had instilled, the questionable fines she'd levied, and her shocking interference with emergency responders. A newly formed Concerned Residents Committee revealed an independent audit of the HOA's finances, uncovering suspicious allocations of funds for enforcement expenses. Evidence suggested Karen had funneled money toward personal legal fees in past disputes, a serious violation of HOA bylaws. Coupled with the public relations disaster of Martin's death, it was the final straw. A vote passed to remove Karen from the board effective immediately and to hold new elections. Cries of relief rippled through the crowd. Though the legal battles continued, the community itself was determined to distance from her malignant influence. About 3 months after Martin's death, the civil lawsuit finally reached the courtroom. The city's lawyers had tried to settle, but Martin Garcia's family demanded a public trial to force accountability. In the proceedings, the defense for the officers insisted they'd been confused by conflicting information at the scene. They placed significant blame on Karen for inciting them. Karen's attorneys argued that she was exercising her right to protect private property and had no control over how the police decided to act. Witness after witness refuted Karen's claims. Trevor Diaz described the final moments of Martin's life, tears welling in his eyes. "If we'd just had 2 more minutes, maybe even less, we could have stabilized him for transport. Instead, I was on the ground, incapacitated. Time that could have saved Martin was lost." Lisa Carter followed, explaining the chaos she encountered. "I came out to help Trevor, and the officers told me to step back. Meanwhile, Martin was inside alone, losing the fight for his life." Jerry Thompson gave a poignant statement about the sanctity of medical calls. "In all my years, I've never seen an HOA official who could override a 911 call, until Karen." Then came Karen's turn to testify. She doubled down on her claims of trespassing, pointing out Martin's unpaid HOA dues and supposed property disputes. The plaintiff's lawyer grilled her with unwavering intensity. "Did you at any point consider that a man's life might be more important than HOA regulations?" Karen floundered, eventually snapping. "If Martin cared about his life, he would have paid his dues, followed our rules, and not forced me into that position." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Her statement instantly turned the jury stone cold against her. The callousness was undeniable. After weeks of testimonies and evidence review, the jury deliberated for just 2 days. Their decision, a sweeping victory for Martin Garcia's family. The city was found liable for the officer's excessive force, and Karen was found personally liable for wrongful interference in emergency services, contributing to Martin's death. The judge's ruling was scathing, condemning Karen's extreme negligence and callous disregard for human life. The city was ordered to pay a substantial settlement to the Garcia family, and the police department had to implement new training protocols around handling medical emergencies and property disputes. As for Karen, the civil verdict was only the beginning. The district attorney, emboldened by the courtroom revelations, pressed criminal charges. Though she wasn't charged with murder in the legal sense, she faced counts of manslaughter by gross negligence, false reporting, and reckless endangerment. The finance audit also uncovered embezzlement of HOA funds, piling on additional felony charges. When the final sentence came down, it shocked even some who despised her. Karen was sentenced to 5 years in state prison for her role in Martin's death and the financial crimes. Furthermore, the judge ordered the confiscation of her property to help cover restitution. Her lavish home, ironically so pristine under her watchful eye, would be sold off to pay legal fees and damages. That was the real end of her unassailable power in Aspen Pine Meadows. In the aftermath of the trial, the city tried to mend its public image. The police department replaced key leadership, introduced mandatory de-escalation training, and created specialized guidelines for responding to medical emergencies. Officers were instructed to prioritize patient care above all else, no longer allowing HOA disputes to overshadow urgent calls. Trevor Diaz, exonerated of any wrongdoing, received an official apology from the mayor and police chief. He accepted it quietly, still haunted by the memory of Martin's final moments. Therapy sessions and support from colleagues helped him cope, but he carried a profound sense of sorrow that the system had failed Martin. Nevertheless, he returned to duty, determined to ensure no other patient would be lost to bureaucracy and power-tripping again. Martin Garcia's family used part of their settlement to establish a scholarship fund in his name, supporting students pursuing careers as EMTs, paramedics, or other first responders. "We want something good to come from this tragedy," Martin's daughter said. "We want to train people who believe in saving lives above all else." For Aspen Pine Meadows, a new era began. With Karen gone, the HOA restructured under empathetic leadership that emphasized community unity over petty fines. The dissolution movement took hold. Residents voted to reduce the HOA's power, limiting it to basic neighborhood upkeep. People breathed easier, decorating their yards without fear, forging stronger bonds as neighbors who'd survived a horrific ordeal. Jerry Thompson, continuing his cardiac rehab, found renewed purpose. He volunteered as an advisor to local EMS boards, advocating policies that protect first responders from interference. He also lobbied for clearer laws ensuring that 911 calls supersede any property disputes. "Martin didn't have to die," he said. "We must prevent the next tragedy." A year passed. The sting of Martin's death remained, but there was a collective effort to move forward. On a warm spring afternoon, the neighborhood organized a memorial service for him at the local park. They planted a magnolia tree in his honor, symbolizing rebirth and hope. Trevor spoke a few words about the importance of compassion, while Jerry thanked everyone who had supported the Garcia family. The mayor attended, quietly acknowledging the city's previous failings. Linda, Lucas, and I stood in the crowd, hands clasped, gazing at the blossoming tree. A sense of closure settled among us, tempered by the knowledge that real closure for Martin's family would never truly come. Still, they found solace in the community's unity and the reforms sparked by their loved one's loss. Back in her cell, Karen would eventually read about these changes on some local news site, if she bothered. She might scoff at the notion that her downfall had actually led to better laws, stronger neighborhoods, and renewed respect for emergency responders. But she had no more power to twist the narrative. The final chapter of her tyranny had been written, sealed by a court verdict and the collective will of an outraged community. And so it ends. A tragedy that began with a misguided sense of HOA authority and ended in heartbreak, but ultimately paved the way for lasting reform. In place of a self-proclaimed ruler who prioritized property lines over human life, Aspen Pine Meadows found its true identity, a neighborhood bound by empathy and mutual respect. Martin Garcia's memory lived on, reminding everyone that a single act of interference could have devastating consequences, yet from darkness, a community could choose to grow into the light. In the wake of these events, statewide legislators drafted a bill, nicknamed Martin's Law, mandating that emergency responders have unquestioned right-of-way during 911 calls, regardless of private property rules. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, ensuring that never again could an overzealous HOA figure or misguided property dispute cost someone their life in such a manner. Trevor Diaz continued to serve as a paramedic, albeit with emotional scars. He regularly spoke to new recruits about the importance of unwavering resolve in emergency situations. "Do not hesitate," he told them. "Your job is to save lives, even when the world tries to block you." Jerry Thompson, back on his feet, served as a guiding voice of wisdom at local town halls. He became a guest lecturer at EMS academies, emphasizing how crucial it is to stand firm against bureaucratic barriers. "Paperwork can wait," he'd say. "Patients can't." As for Karen, Denise Arnell. Her downfall was the talk of the region for a while. Journalists milked her story as a cautionary tale about HOA Overreach. Yet, with time, she became a footnote, a reminder of what happens when one person's obsession with control grows unchecked. She served her prison term, her property long gone. By the time of her release, Aspen Pine Meadows had moved on without her, blossoming into a community determined to honor life above all else. Neighbors no longer whispered in fear about fines or citations. They shared barbecues, children played in the streets, and holiday decorations illuminated every corner of the neighborhood. The fresh paint, well-kept gardens, and newly planted memorial trees weren't just for show. They symbolized genuine care for one another. A tragic loss had forced Aspen Pine Meadows to reevaluate its values. But at least now, if a paramedic siren blared at 2 a.m., people stepped aside, held open doors, and guided them straight to the patient's side. No questions asked. Because in the end, no rule or regulation matters more than a human life. And that, more than anything, became the true legacy of Martin Garcia's story and the end of Karen's unyielding reign.